Sandra May Flowers. I just became the first African American student government president at Hostess College in the Bronx. And what has disheartened me is that in the Bronx is the most unhealthiest borough in New York. So I was wondering if, and I know that they have the highest asthma rate, so I was wondering if, is it because they have a lot of those plants there? What is the reason that they have that high asthma rate?
I can answer that. They have 23 waste transfer stations. They have Hunts Point, which has, what, 500 trucks a day in and out. They are basically barricaded in by the Major Deegan, the Bruckner, the Cross Bronx, right? I mean, I think it's just a classic environmental justice community. They're completely cut off from the waterfront. But there's actually a lot of community groups that I've worked with in the past and still do that are trying to take back the waterfront. We fought a power plant, or in my past life, we stopped a power plant with some of the community groups, and it was on waterfront property. And so there's a few groups that are trying to clean up the waterfront to bring access and to bring some of the healthier, you know, all those healthy, sustainable principles, so you have a walkable, livable city. And I think that some of the work that Mayor Bloomberg's office is doing is trying to reduce some of the impacts through the tree planting and changing over some of the buses to natural gas. So I just think that it's a community that has the typical legacy issues of many environmental justice communities. And through community activism, they're really changing the footprint and the look of the waterfront and some of the industry. There's like a rebuilders recycling facility there now that is trying to recycle instead of just throw out some of the garbage they're recycling. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Right, yeah.
And they also have in the Bronx as well as Harlem, that a lot of the buses, depots are there, and a lot of, there's a group called the Environmental Justice Harlem that's working on the idling of buses that's coming into the depot, as well as the idling of trucks that is polluting the air, which is the center of this conference altogether, is that anything that is bad for your health seems to always be created in people of color's neighborhoods. And that is it in a nutshell. Is that it's, you know, be it a power plant, an incinerator, a bus depot, the hundreds of gas stations. Here in Los Angeles, it's just curious to see that I would say over 50% of bus stops happen to be in front of the service station.
Are you in touch with the Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice, Julie and Tyrell?
Yeah, we can probably give you a list of some of the community groups that are working in New York City and in the Bronx to reduce some of those impacts. You know, I wanted to mention one thing, I'm sorry, but we were talking about incinerators, and I think that for purposes of environmental justice, when we talk about supporting communities and the work that they're doing, the reason the Bronx ended up with 23, or the South Bronx ended up with 23 waste transfer stations is because the community won fighting an incinerator. And so we always have to think about what's going to, you know, we fight this power plant today, but we like to turn our lights and our air conditioners. So let's make sure that we're protecting the community as a whole. And so one of the things that I think was learned from some of the EJ communities in New York City was we have to be prepared with a plan. And so don't build an incinerator, but don't change it into 500 trucks carting in and out garbage. And so what's the plan for recycling or for alternatives? And anyway, so I just think it's a good example of how communities come together and really think about what their community is going to look like, how they're going to recycle, how they're going to build green jobs and be a cleaner community. So I just wanted to mention.
Thank you. So we had 2 more questions, I think, at least, yeah, and then, yeah, so.
Yes, my name is Willie Fitzgerald, and I'm from Virginia. And trying to cut right through to the chase of my question. They're proposed to build a uranium plant not too far from where I live. And I haven't heard any of y'all touch on that. And concerning clean air and water and all of that. My question, I guess, possibly is, with the technology of today, is it possible to do it safely? What should the position that we should be taking right now to try to stop it or whatever? Whatever information you can give me.
I'll take a swing at that. Okay, so if you look around the country today, the average age of a coal plant is more than 40 years old. You'll find that there is the average age of a nuclear power plant is almost 40 years old, designed to last for 30 years. You have big concerns about gas infrastructure and questions about solar and wind. And so what will happen no matter what is that there will be more than $1 trillion invested in energy over the next two decades. Right? So we have to find some way to keep our hair dryers working and our iPhones charged and our televisions working. And so the way that the Sierra Club thinks about this, at least, is we ask 4 questions to think through what's the best way for energy to be produced in this country. What is the safest? What's the form of energy that won't cause meltdowns, that won't cause major harm to come to a significant portion of the population? What is fastest? What can come online quickly? What won't take a decade to build, or what can be brought online in time to meet the energy demand from people? What is the cleanest? What produces the least amount of pollution? And what's the cheapest? What are the energy sources that can meet the energy demands without causing skyrocketing rates? When you look at nuclear power, it ranks last or almost last in all 4 categories. Nuclear power is not safe. It's arguably the most expensive form of energy, although I think Ananda would show some data saying it's second most expensive compared to incinerators. It most definitely is not clean. And it is probably the slowest type of energy to come online. So there are a number of different nuclear type facilities, either uranium mines or reprocessing facilities, nuclear power plants, or waste dumps that are being proposed all across the country. Sierra Club, and I think a lot of other groups, are opposed to it because it won't work economically and it certainly won't work environmentally. And so there are a lot of other options to produce power in ways that don't put communities at risk.
Okay.
All I'd add to that is that I think Mike's right. I think those are the appropriate filters. I think often it's important to note that today the nuclear power industry, like the waste incinerator industry, are trying to promote themselves as a clean solution. So you'll hear things like safe nuclear power, very similar to clean coal or safe incinerators. But, and I think if you ask Mike's question, I think a lot of that comes to light. It's important also to keep in mind that the problems from cradle to grave, and by that I mean from mining the uranium to processing it and then finally using it for energy, there's a whole series of impacts that not only would impact your community in terms of where the power is generated, but the communities that are impacted by the mining and the tailings from the mining, and then ultimately where the nuclear waste is disposed. They still haven't found an economical or safe way to dispose of nuclear waste, which is around for hundreds of years, causing all kinds of ecological and human health impacts.
So finally, we have a great chapter in Virginia. We'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay, yes, sir.
Just a question to follow up. Ms. Garcia pointed out with regard to reporting for states and some municipalities, I believe, on their GHG emissions as well as carbon footprint. Just wondering to what extent, granted we have some discussion previously with cap and trade, there's also consideration of carbon offsets. I'm just wondering, what are some of the penalties for states where they're not facilitating management of carbon footprinting in different cities or just how they would go about managing or forcing states to cut back on their GHG emissions.
So the first round, I forgot the date, but the first round of some of the greenhouse gas, I guess, regulations are gonna go out, in, hold on a second. I think it's, the first ones are gonna be focused on power plants and oil refineries. So it's not across the board yet, so there's no real, regulation, on reductions, I should say. So those are coming. That's what I would say generally. The reporting requirements were for EPA to get a handle, to take the information and to see what, to figure out what the lay of the land is and where, what facilities have the biggest carbon footprint, I guess, and to hopefully give us the information we need to start looking at power plants and oil refineries. And then for the vehicle standards, those are going to go into place in 2016, and so you'll start seeing reductions in the fleets or the requirements, and so those will just be enforced through the factories reporting out and making sure that the cars are meeting those standards for lower carbon or anyway, lower greenhouse gas emissions.
Now, will that reporting also tie in, I guess it's an add-on, will that reporting also tie in for municipalities, let's say wastewater facilities, where a number of times they're processing the water, they generate their own electricity, yet they have a very large smokestack usually sitting in or near the heart of the city, and it's just emitting out tons and tons of carbon per hour?
I cannot answer that specifically, whether it includes wastewater treatment plants. I know that they get federal permits sometimes, or delegated federal permits. And so I assume that would be a part of it, but I can get you that information. I'll give you my card. I know that for air facilities, definitely, that's part of the reporting requirements. And I'm not sure, do you know that? If it includes wastewater treatment plants. But my understanding would be if it has a federally delegated permit or a federal permit, it would.
So one of the big fights, it's an important question because one of the big fights, and I think Lee is familiar with, is that the incinerator industries lobbied the EPA and worked with federal officials really hard to get all kinds of exemptions. And one of the exemptions provided stationary sources of power plants is for what they call the biogenic carbon. So the carbon dioxide that is produced as a result of burning trees, organic portions of waste, anything that is organic in nature. The problem with this is that this is ultimately, at the end of the day, it is carbon in the atmosphere. It's an accounting term that industries actually misleadingly used to claim some kind of a carbon neutrality. It's actually a bit of the International Scientific Panel advises that it not be considered carbon neutral, but they have, here in the US, the industry has actually twisted that term. And so there is a dialogue going on with some of Lisa's colleagues right now at the EPA. I know the EPA has decided to withhold capping those emissions for 3 years while it studies the issue more. But I believe that is going to be a core fight because these incinerators, these smokestacks, are going in people of color in communities like you mentioned in Georgia. We're going to see that we've done some mapping in Texas, in Pennsylvania, some of the other states. It's exactly similar. It's a disproportionate burden. Number of smokestacks are going in people of color communities. This is going to be a key fight, where they're going to be placing those biomass or those smokestacks that are burning biogenic carbon and getting a pass, a free pass.